I challenged myself constantly to make sure that I was giving a lesson where I could see that learning was taking place. That was a really, really key turning point for me. And that made me think, yeah, I want to be in this industry and I want to stay in it and I do want to get better. It comes down to having a good support network, both in work and outside of it as well. When it comes to neurodiversity, there are so many things that can change on a daily basis. And one thing that you've tried before might not work the next day. It's helped me to think about what they're feeling, and it's given me a lot more empathy. And I feel like a bit more of a well-rounded teacher now. If someone says to you, I want to do this course, but I don't know if it's going to be accessible for me, your job is to make it accessible for them. If you feel like you're going to fail at the first step, that's our responsibility to cover that and to make sure that actually, if you do fall, we can pick you up.
It's good to see you again, Laurie, and really nice to be back in Liverpool. How are you?
I'm really good, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing good, thank you. Yeah, good. I know that you've had a really interesting journey and you've got some interesting experiences to share about your teaching career. But before we get into that, perhaps you could just introduce yourself and your teaching context here at LILA.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Laurie. I'm the senior teacher and the safeguarding lead here at LILA College. We're primarily an ELT college, and we do ESL, we do A-levels, do UFP. We started off teaching English as a second language, and then we've branched off into all sorts of things. My focus is primarily on the English language side of things, and also teacher training. And then, we've got students from all over the world, multicultural, multilingual. That's the key thing. We don't have any really monolingual classes. So, we're kind of all over the board with it.
And your learners here predominantly are adults, but you also have some young learners seasonally, is that right?
True. So as is quite typical in July and August, we get a lot of our younger learners, teens, juniors. But for the most part, we do adults, some scholarships who are here for, anywhere from 6 to 9 months. But mostly it's, shorter stays, adults who come all around the year.
Let's go to the beginning of the journey that's brought you to this place then. When we were talking earlier, you said to me that you fell very easily into an academic life. Why do you think that was?
It's an interesting one because from a very young age, I was surrounded by people who were really invested in education. So my grandfather was in the military, and then when he came out of that, he got a job in insurance. And one thing that he always really loved to do was read. And he encouraged me to be a reader, to read fiction, to read nonfiction, and to just fill my head with loads of ideas. And he was a really big supporter of my education and of my journey, always encouraged me to go to university and to give myself opportunities. My mum, too, worked in the primary school that I went to, and then indeed in the high school that I went to. So I was constantly surrounded by educators or people who were involved in education as a concept. I knew all my teachers. Some of them came to my house to, hang out with my mum. So for me, I was constantly surrounded by academics. And it was just very natural to me to have those conversations and to talk about these things. And that's where I started, really.
So it's easy to understand how your family influenced the pathway towards teaching. But I think I'm right in saying that you sort of fell into English language teaching by chance. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true.
Can you tell us how that happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was studying at university here in Liverpool, and I wanted to do something to fill my time outside of it, and also to fund myself, to have a bit of a part-time job. One of my close friends was studying at university, and he was studying languages, and he recommended a website to me that was teaching English, basically. And so I looked into it, signed up, and there were 2 different types of teachers you could be on that. If you had CELTA and all your qualifications, then you could sign up and become a bit more of a official one. But then there were also community tutors. And so I signed up to do that and was able to sort of plan and manage my own lessons. And I didn't really think too much about it. I'd always liked the idea of teaching, but but I kind of fell into it very suddenly. And what really appealed to me about the job was you could plan whenever you wanted to do your lessons. So if I was available on Saturday morning, I could do it then. If I was available on Friday night, I could do it then. And there were students from all over the world who wanted real, native English speakers, as it were. And so I just started, and suddenly people started popping up, giving me business and giving me loads of experience of just, first and foremost, speaking to people, but also giving me lots of ideas about things that they wanted to learn. And it was actually during that job that I first learned what a phrasal verb was, because a student said, I want to learn phrasal verbs. And I was like, oh yeah, I definitely know what they are. Give me until next lesson and I'll come back. And that was my first moment that I remember where I was like, oh, wow, there's something here, to really explore. And that's where I started.
Sounds like it gave you the grounding to start building teaching techniques in the early days. And I think it gave you experience of teaching online at a time when the English teaching world was relatively inexperienced, but was suddenly about to be thrust into that world. How did that help you when the pandemic hit and everything reverted to online? It
was really crucial, to be honest. When the pandemic hit and there was lots of discussion about what we were going to do and training coming up and, okay, let's get ready to go online, a lot of people were very nervous about the concept. And, in a lot of course books, they pose the question, what will education be like in 10 years, 15 years? And everyone around me was very nervous about the concept of teaching online, being in the bedroom, being in the kitchen, wherever they were. For me, it almost in a way felt like a homecoming at first. And I was like, okay, this is what I know. This is my background. This is where I started. It's nice to go back to that for a little bit and see, what things have changed. The crucial difference was that I would be teaching classes, not one-to-one. So it prepared me in a sense in a technological way. But managing a classroom online was quite difficult. And I think a lot of people felt it was a challenge. So while it was useful from a tech perspective, from a classroom management perspective, it was still quite a hill to get over. But it put me on good stead to kind of start off and jump in. And I feel like my students recognized that straight away. They were like, oh, you know what you're doing, around whatever program we were using. And it made them feel a bit more comfortable because I was comfortable. So I think it was really quite a useful bit of experience to have during that time.
You mentioned that you're the designated safeguarding lead for the college here and a senior member of the academic team. Obviously, it's natural for you to have provided support to your teaching colleagues, and obviously you continue to do that. How do you do that and still ensure your own development and looking after yourself in the process?
It was difficult initially, to be honest. I've always been the kind of person that wanted to focus on helping other people. And I would give a lot of myself to others without really taking the time to focus on myself. And when I stepped into the safeguarding lead role, a big part of that initial training that I had, that there was an emphasis on making sure that you were safeguarding yourself as well. And part of that relates to mental health, to wellbeing. We've got a lot of little ways here to make sure that everybody's looked after, not just the students, but the staff as well. For me, it comes down to having a good support network, both in work and outside of it as well. If there's been any particularly difficult days where I've been very swamped or I'm spinning too many plates and I feel like, whoa, I'm doing too much here, having some downtime after that is really, really crucial. So one thing that I do is really streamline my lesson planning. I feel like I'm very good at lesson planning now, which is great. And I can put that into like a really short window. So I give myself a bit of extra time for myself to do whatever I want. And leaving work, especially as a safeguarding lead, leaving work at work is incredibly difficult because you're sort of available 24/7 when you're safeguarding. But having the boundary to say, okay, does this need to be dealt with imminently? Or is this something that I can do tomorrow? And that was the biggest thing that I had to develop. And that's really helped me to make sure that I can have that line between, okay, does this need to be done now or can it wait till tomorrow? And that's the first question I will ask myself.
And I know here at LILA you have an initiative that's designed to support the staff's mental well-being. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Actually, we have a budget to give our teachers and other members of staff basically an afternoon, the last day of the month, or the last Friday of every month, where we will get some snacks or drinks or some kind of food and run an activity. So it could be something like skill sharing. We did a painting class recently where we had little mini canvases and we were just painting things. We also did something really nice where we had we made a little paper chain where we put our goals and ideas for the next quarter on the inside and then wrapped it together and stuck it together. And that's hanging up downstairs in the staff room. And it's just an afternoon where everyone gets away from their desk and every person in the office is there. You know, you've often got the separation between the administration staff and the academic staff. And that isn't really a thing at LILA. Everybody knows each other. Everybody works together. Everyone's got responsibilities across the whole school. It's balanced in a way that we all know each other's names. We all know about each other's families. And having that afternoon once a month where we can just go in and say, okay, what are we doing today? We're painting or we're doing something really nice. You know, we're just having a bit of a relaxation time. Just that hour away from the desk. It's just been life-changing from a team building point of view. Yeah, it's really, really nice.
It sounds excellent. I think I should look to coincide my next visit to you on a Friday afternoon so I can come and join in.
Join us, yeah, join us.
Let's take it back to your teaching career and more specifically your training journey. You've told me about some constructive feedback that you received in an early lesson observation. How did this impact your training from that point as you grew as a teacher?
It's funny looking back at it because from my perspective, that first observation was a bit of a disaster. To give you the context, I was about 6 months or so after I'd done my training, my CELTA training, and I'd been in and out of teaching for a little bit before I started here full time. And I did a class where the DOS was observing, and the feedback was. There was a lot of constructive feedback. Too much of this, too little of that. Where's your clarification? Blah blah blah. And in the moment, I felt really upset. I felt really shocked. But I realized that okay, you know, this is a turning point. Do I want to continue doing this? You know, is this a rejection that's going to put me off, or is this something that I build on? And at that time, I knew that I was about to give a talk at a CPD session. So I thought, you know what, I have to kind of put a bit more effort into this, do a bit of research, make sure that I'm actually giving myself to this role fully. And so I did a lot of action research. I went back to some of the CELTA books, looked at some of my lesson plans and just thought, okay, how can I improve on these little things? And in every lesson going forward, I was very aware of what I was doing. Am I clarifying these things? Am I checking the instructions? Am I monitoring effectively? And over the course of the next month, up until the presentation, I was kind of doing like blind observations on myself where at the end of the class I was like, okay, was that successful? What could I change? And when it came to the presentation, I was actually talking about my master's dissertation, which was centered around authentic listening and helping students to improve their listening skills. And I got really, really good feedback from that presentation. A lot of the people watching were like, oh, that was really interesting. You had lots of really good ideas. And the person who had observed me initially, Jim, he was watching that and he said, you know, you've nailed that. I think you've done a really good job. And that gave me a lot of my confidence back. And from there, it was just kind of an upward hill of, you know, I'm just gonna keep going, researching, doing what I can. And I challenged myself constantly to make sure that I was giving a lesson where I could see that learning was taking place. And that was a really, really key turning point for me. And that made me think, yeah, I want to be in this industry and I want to stay in it and I do want to get better.
That was very impactful.
Yeah.
And now, as a senior teacher, I assume you're responsible yourself for carrying out quite a lot of classroom observations.
True.
And given the sort of multitude of different personalities in the world of teaching, how do you approach it to ensure that each individual gets the best out of the observations that you carry out?
I vastly prefer doing developmental observations to standardization. So, I mean, I'll give an example of what I've done this year. We did 2 observations per teacher a couple of months ago. And the first one I went in from a developmental point of view and spoke to the teacher ahead of time and asked what issues or what worries do they have about teaching. And a lot of them said, oh, I don't think I'm very good at teaching grammar. I don't think I'm very good at presenting language. And then some of them said things like, I'm not really confident about skills. How do you teach speaking, for example? So what I did is I made a profile of each teacher and said, this is what the teacher wants to work on. This is what I'm going to focus on. During the first observation, I just made a bunch of notes about various things. And then I gave a big kind of like a bit of feedback to them, a summary of what went well. And it's very teacher-centered in a sense when I question them, because I asked them, what do you think went well? What would you change? And eliciting from teachers rather than going in and saying, okay, here's what was good and here's what was bad. It's so much more effective because it should be a dialogue. Observation feedback should never, in my opinion, should never be one-sided. It should always be a dialogue because the real goal is to help a teacher's development. Even when you've got standardization to do, I'd take the approach of this is for paperwork or whatever. This is for inspection standards, etc. Really, really important. But what's important to me as well is the development of the staff. And there will always be that emphasis on an observation for me. And people are grateful for it.
Some useful advice there. Thank you.
It's time for a top tip that you can use in your classroom. This tip is from Jade Blue. Jade is an English language teacher, teacher trainer, researcher, and materials developer.
Sometimes you want to group particular students together because of level or confidence, and sometimes you just want variety. One thing I quite like to do, particularly with large groups, is at the beginning of a session, as they come into the room or on their desks, I'll put Cuisenaire rods. That's Cuisenaire. You can also use Lego blocks. They're little coloured wooden blocks, and they were originally designed for maths teaching. So they're different lengths and different colours. And so I'll give them out to students as they come into the room. And then when I want them to get into groups, I'll say, okay, find anyone else who's got a red block and group together with them, or find someone who's got a blue block and group together with them. But it works with anything. It works with lollipop sticks or anything like that. Another nice trick is if you have, and some teachers have this for different types of activities. I know they have their students' names on a lollipop stick in a cup facing down, so they can draw names out at random to nominate students. But if you have that, then it's quite nice as well that you just pick out a lollipop stick and then another one and say, okay, this person and this person, you're together in a pair. That's quite nice.
You touched earlier upon some action research that you'd done, and I know from speaking to you previously that you've done quite a lot of that. Can you share something with us that has really impacted on your own teaching?
There's one quite famous bit of action research that I've done, and I say famous because a lot of teachers here use the same procedure now. I'm very invested in listening, and I think listening to develop awareness and to develop vocabulary is a really key thing for students. And I noticed that a lot of my students were not happy with listening. They were really uncomfortable. And I mean, a lot of them come to Liverpool and people here have a very specific accent, and they get here and they're met with Scousers and they're like, oh my God, have I made the wrong decision? And so for me, I wanted to develop my students' listening skills outside of the classroom as well. And so I did a bit of research into extensive listening and came up with sort of a way that students can teach themselves, where they'll look at a piece of media, they'll think of some questions that they can ask going in, they'll listen, they'll try and answer their own questions. And in a sense, they take a bit of a teacher role before they become a learner. So instead of just watching a TV series and hoping that something sticks, they go in with an actual purpose. And so using short form videos was really useful. I did a bit of a case study with one student, and she said it was really valuable. And then I delivered it to a bunch of teachers. And then I was asked to deliver it at a CPD session for teachers across the Northwest. And it's kind of changed the way that I approach teaching listening as a skill. And a lot of other people have said to me that they're using that approach. And it gets good feedback, and it's kind of changed. That was the first step for me to do further action research, because I was so inspired by that. And I was like, oh, wow, I've done something quite impactful here. Let's keep the ball rolling. And now I do a lot of CPD and ask teachers to do action research, sometimes off the back of observations. If they're not as successful at a particular skill, I'll say, okay, go and do some research, then teach, and then present it to us as CPD. The onus is very much on them. So that kickstarted a bunch of CPD sessions that have been really valuable here at the college.
I think it's an excellent development tool, and can be really well utilised at all sorts of different stages of a teaching career. Something I'm really fascinated by in your story is that you were undiagnosed with ADHD until adulthood. And I'd like to ask you how that's shaped your approach to teaching.
Yeah, it has quite a bit. I always suspected that I might have some kind of neurodivergence, to be honest with you, but it wasn't something that I was able to really focus on until I became an adult. And once I was diagnosed, for me, it put into context a lot of things. There's a kind of underlying explanation as to why I do certain things or why I feel certain ways. And it made me reflect on how students could also be feeling the same things, regardless of their level of diagnosis, And for me, it shaped the way that I approach dealing with people in general. And it was after that I became the safeguarding lead, and it condensed into one big kind of moment for me where I realized, okay, how I approach dealing with people and how I approach being in the classroom is shaped in some way by my neurodivergence. And I felt that it was crucial to focus on how that impacts students, whether it's something that I'm doing that impacts them, or whether there are students in the classroom with ADHD, with autism, or any kind of neurodiversity. And it's helped me to kind of think about what they're feeling, and it's given me a lot more empathy. And I feel like a bit more of a well-rounded teacher now that I can consider from different angles: classroom setup, classroom management, effective filters, all of these little things that we hear about and are trained for in CELTA. When it comes to neurodiversity, there are so many things that can change on a daily basis. And one thing that you've tried before might not work the next day. That's the nature of something like ADHD and something like autism. So it's helped me to give advice to students. It's helped me to help them learn a little bit better. And yeah, I would say it shaped it incredibly for the better, which is great.
I wonder sometimes whether we, as an industry, subconsciously create barriers to entry into the industry, the initial teacher qualifications for neurodivergent people. Don't know if you'd agree with that. And if you do, what do you think we collectively as an industry can do to break those barriers down?
I do agree to an extent. I think that it's something we were discussing earlier, that a lot of people with any kind of neurodiversity would look at a course like CELTA with how condensed it is and how intense it is and go, actually, I don't think I can stomach that. One thing that we do during, for example, CELTA interviews is we ask people if they want to tell us anything about themselves. Is there any way that we can help them during the course? And inevitably, someone will say, I'm autistic, or I have ADHD and I struggle with these things. It's important for me to be bespoke in how you deal with these things, because what works for one person is not going to work for another person. And taking a kind of multifaceted approach to that and getting the person's opinion and knowing what helps them, you have to take a very can-do attitude to these things. And if someone says to you, I want to do this course, but I don't know if it's going to be accessible for me, your job as a trainer is to make it accessible for them. And that's the first step. It's like, okay, let's have a chat then. Tell me more about what we can do to help you. Here are the things that we can do. For example, we had one student who told us from the beginning, I have this. And we said, okay, come earlier, come and see the school, walk around it. We'll put a plan together for you. Tell us what is going to make this course accessible for you, because your future should not be dictated by a perceived barrier, as you said. And if you feel like you're going to fail at the first step, that's not your fault. That's our responsibility to cover that and to make sure that actually, if you do fall, we can pick you up. And that's something I think our industry really needs to focus on and really needs to do more of. How can we make things accessible to anyone, regardless of ability? It's
encouraging to hear you say it, particularly given your own personal experiences, and it's inspiring as well. So thank you for sharing those with us. Let's now move on to the feature of this podcast called That Feeling When, where we ask you to share that feeling when, and tell us your story behind a particular moment. Would you like to go ahead with that?
Yes. That feeling when you stop feeling like an imposter. That was the first thing that came to my mind. Identity is really important for me, and being able to understand your place in the world and your place in your company, your place in the school, wherever you are. It's really important to make sure that you feel like you're a part of something. And for many years, I felt, especially stepping up into a senior role, I was looking around at people and going, do I deserve to be here? Am I the right person for this job? Obviously, someone said, yeah, you can have this job. So there was an element of trust there, but it's hard to believe in that sometimes when you feel there's someone here with so much experience, but I've been given this role. And for me, I think that lack of confidence in myself sometimes reflected in the classroom, where I thought if something went wrong, I thought, well, it's because I don't have the experience, or it's because someone is better than me. And it was, in a way, it was a really toxic way of thinking, because I wasn't giving myself a chance. And very recently, I had a bit of an off day, as we all do. And I had a chat with the director of studies, and we discussed a little bit. And he basically said, you have these responsibilities because we know you are able to fulfill them. And it was just being able to hear that from somebody else who I trust and who I work so closely with. It really gave me like a lot of food for thought. And I had to go home and be like, you know what? I need to be of the mindset that I am capable of doing this and that I'm worthy of having this role. And I came back the next day and I said, you know what? You're right. It's fine. I'm absolutely in my right to be here. And I have the support of all the staff, and people trust me with so many different things. And it changed my approach in a sense, to how I approach lessons and how I approach teaching, because I don't feel anymore that I'm a bit of an imposter and that I'm kind of faking it. I feel very confident in what I can deliver. And if I know I don't have the skills, then I'll simply go and get those skills. I'll train. I'll ask for help when I need it. That was something I was particularly bad at, asking for help. And very recently, within the last year or so, it struck me, you are in this position because people want you to be in that position and people think you are worthy of that. And it just, one day, it just clicked. And I was like, all right, yeah, now it's time to start acting like you are confident enough to fulfill this role. And it started from there. And it's made every day a little bit easier to face, because all of the things that we face in this industry, in the classroom, outside the classroom, from a safeguarding point of view, some things are really difficult. But being able to say to myself, you have the skills to do this, has meant that I can pretty much tackle anything that comes up. And if I need help, I'll ask for it. And that was a really big moment that has changed my teaching and my approach to work in general forever. So I feel really happy that I finally got there. And that's really cool.
Sounds like a lot of resolve and some support from others to create a success story.
Absolutely. And a lot of introspection. Yeah, that's necessary. I think teachers do that quite a lot. But it has to go in a positive direction. And I feel like it did, which is great.
Great. Thank you. Time for some quickfire questions. What one thing couldn't you live without in your classroom?
A clock. And sometimes they go missing. But yeah, it's important.
Where do they go?
I don't know, Joel. If you find them, please tell me.
Morning lessons or afternoon lessons?
Much more productive in the morning. Definitely morning.
I'm with you on that. Digital resources or pen and paper?
Pen and paper. Considering where I started, a bit ironic. I love pen and paper. Live by it.
What is your go-to snack or drink during the teaching day?
Can't live without a cup of tea. And just a handful of pine nuts. They're good.
Last one, Laurie. What's your worst teaching habit?
I sometimes give a running dialogue of what I'm doing and what's next, and have to remember TTT. Bring it down.
Thank you very much. It's been really good to talk to you.
Thank you, Joel. It's
Cheers.
been lovely. Cheers.